correct.
What's going on, everybody? This is Steffen. I'm Jason. This is Tennessee Mountain Homestead, and today we're back working on Steffen's mud mower build. Today we're gonna get into finishing up the axle from last week. We're gonna put tires on it. We're gonna paint some parts, some pieces, do a little bit of welding here and there, and we're gonna get right into it. We're kind of getting a late start today. This video is gonna be a tonight video, plus probably most of the day tomorrow. So tonight, the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna get the tires and rims off the tractor, all four of them. We're gonna de-beat them, we're gonna prep the rims, and we're gonna paint them. So that's happening tonight. We're gonna go ahead and get started on that now. Got the tractor comfortably up off the ground, a good working height. We've got it supported by jack stands, and we're gonna go and Steffen's gonna take the tires off now. I saved this on purpose because my son Jace is gonna love this. He's infatuated with anything inflatable. Nobody likes turf tires. bead on this tire using this tool here. So I'm gonna go ahead and call my little friend. Oh my God, why don't you just die? This next tire is showing the same signs the last one did, with the bead just being very stubborn, not wanting to come off that rim. So I'm gonna take a shot here in the dark and see if I can just crush it off with the vise. Now that the tires are all off these rims, Steffen's gonna go ahead and start cleaning them up. Looks like out of two of them, he's got his work cut out. Look at that. But at least where the beads ride are good. And these are gonna have inner tubes anyways. We're gonna put fluid in the front tires for him. Anyway, let's get to work.
So here we are, guys, outside. I got the rim on this 1-inch rod bolted to the table, and I'm gonna start wire brushing this thing off. And when you're doing this sort of thing, always make sure to wear safety glasses.
While Steffen's outside wire brushing those rims down, I went ahead and I went in the laundry room in our sink. All right, guys, so this rim just came straight from the oven. It's about 225 degrees. And what you're gonna wanna do for a top quality Tennessee Mountain Homestead style paint job is wait until it's the most humid possible night when it's dank and warm outside, even though it's supposed to be cold. And then just go ahead and throw your rims in the oven, bake off all the humidity. Make sure your can is well shaken. 2 for $10 at Ace today. Nice gloss black. We're gonna go ahead and get to painting. We want these things to be dry by tomorrow so we can go ahead and mount the tires on. That's why we're working overtime tonight. And also you're gonna wanna put the coats on as thick as possible And remember, if you get a run, immediately use your finger and wipe the run, and then just spray back over it again. It's been a couple hours later. We got the back rims painted. They've been in and out of the oven. They're dry to the touch. They'll be 100% tomorrow to put the tires on. Steffen and Ethan both worked for like 3 hours to clean these up. They had to grind off all that rust, all that particulate, all that stuff that was caked on here. And then he took it inside of the sink and he scrubbed out the inside, all the caked on grease. Anyways, these things are about 170 degrees from the oven. I just painted this one. I'm gonna paint that one. And then we're gonna call it a night. Tomorrow, we're gonna get back on this thing full throttle. We're gonna put tires on this thing. We're gonna finish the axle. We're gonna get this thing, hopefully, ready to ride tomorrow. So I'm gonna get back to painting, and we'll see you in the morning. It's the next day. These rims have had all night to dry. They're dry to the touch. But we're gonna go ahead and leave them here a little longer because we're gonna get back on the front axle. Before we can even put the tires and the wheels back on this thing, the front axle needs to be finished out. Let's go ahead and talk about what we're gonna do to that next. There's a couple things we need to do to this axle before it's 100% good to go. One of those things is support it. Support it from being able to go back and forth, because the only thing holding this right now is that bolt in the center. So what we're gonna do is directly copy what Hot Lab Garage did to his axle, and that's, we're gonna weld a couple of tabs to these bumps on the back of the axle. And these bumps used to be the support for the same purpose on the John Deere, only they rubbed against a piece of steel that's on the John Deere. Here, that's non-existent. So we're gonna weld a couple tabs using this 3/16 bar stock to each side of this cast steel piece here. And then there's gonna be a tie rod that bolts through those tabs, and it's gonna come back here to a structure or another bolt on the frame. And that's gonna be on both sides. And that's gonna give us adjustability, and it's going to stabilize that axle 100%. The other thing we need to do is weld in steering stops. So somewhere on this steering arm, we need to weld a piece of steel that's just going to bump against the axle so it can't turn all the way and cause the gears to either slip or just put this tie rod under a big load by pushing it too far. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna weld some stops on this, and then once we have all this stuff welded on and mocked up and finished, it's good, we're gonna take this stuff back apart. We're gonna sand everything down. We're gonna paint everything, reassemble it. Let's get into it. We're gonna get started on building the tabs for the axle. I think that's gonna take the most time and be the most difficult. So like I said, we're gonna use this piece of bar stock I have, and we're gonna use this for a couple reasons. First of all, it's got some good thickness to it. Second of all, we don't have a whole bunch of machining tools and stuff around here. It's all just handheld tools and handheld power tools. So making parts isn't the easiest thing to do, especially when it comes to thicker steel. So what I'm gonna do is cut 4 pieces equal length out of this. We're gonna drill the hole through them all in the drill press at the exact same place, same time. And then bolt them together, and then we'll draw the shape we want and cut it out all at once. So we'll have 4 identical pieces. And after that's done, we're gonna weld them to each side of this tab. I've got my 4 pieces cut, 3 1/4 inches. They're all stacked up, ready to go in the vise. Let's get them spot welded.
Guys, I've got the tie rod here in the vise, and what I'm doing is I'm taking off these original tie rod ends. Now these are tie rods for a Polaris ATV, and we'll have a picture up there on the screen. And the reason we're taking these off and using these high end joints is that we want to have a 1/2 inch bolt in the frame. That'll be a lot stronger than a 3/8, which is what this is. And we need a high joint to fit in between the bumps of the axle. where we'll be bolting it to the axle. Alright, as you can see, we've got the high man joints on the tie rods. It's pretty beefy. Next thing up, we're going to use the sandpaper, get the stickers off this thing, get it scuffed up so that we can paint it.
I've got my 4 pieces of steel welded together, and I've got a mark where I'm gonna drill for the first hole for the heim joint to go in. I have it biased over to off of center because when it's welded to the axle, I want that hole to be over top of the bumps, if that makes sense. I don't want it to be out so it has any leverage. Anyway, I thought it would be better. We're gonna go ahead and put it in the drill press. That first hole was 3/8. Now we're gonna step it up to 1/2 inch. All right, and just like that, now we'll have 4 pieces with the holes in the exact same place. And I'm gonna drill a couple of holes down low, probably I guess 3/8, maybe 1/2 inch again, 1 or 2 holes. So that way when it's on the tab on the axle, I'll be able to plug weld through that as well as weld around the perimeter. I just got done drilling out for the plug weld hole in these fixtures. So I'm gonna step it up to 1/2 inch. And there's one very important rule that we always have to remember when using power equipment. And that's this, boys and girls. Now, let's get back to our regularly scheduled programming. Now I've got my holes drilled. That's gonna be for the plug weld. And we're kind of on the fence if we're gonna just drill through that stub on the axle, but I don't think so. I think we're just gonna plug weld it. But as you can see, I've drawn my line how it's gonna be shaped. It's gonna be a little bit more narrow at the bottom where it sits on the sides of those tabs. So that way I can weld around the perimeter. And then it's gonna come out to the full thickness of this whole thing. And we'll round off the corners. And that's gonna be it. I'm gonna go ahead and get to that, grind all the edges so that everything's flush and everything's the same. Then I'll grind off these tack welds and I'll have 4 identical pieces. Got the general shape where I need it. I've got it ground flush on 3 sides, or actually 1, 2, 3, yeah, 3 sides. This is the last side. I'll grind off these welds and then these pieces should fall apart. But that's what we got going on. Alright, the welds are all ground off. And I've got 4 identical pieces. We're going to go ahead and weld these. We're going to finish cleaning up the mill scale and some of where that bandsaw cut in. I don't want that cut to be there. We'll grind that out so it's not a weak point. But we're going to go ahead and clean these up a little bit more. Next thing, Steffen's going to take the axle back out of that thing. We're gonna get that thing cleaned up, ground down. We're gonna preheat it with a torch, and then we're gonna start figuring out how these are gonna weld on there. Let's get into it.
All right, we're ready to start taking off this axle. First thing to do is the tie rods. next step is to take out the 5/16 bolt that holds in the axle pin.
Alright, so I've got the heim joint ends bolted into these tabs I made. And I put spacers on each side of the joint because it needs that room to be able to articulate. What we've got here now, this is what it looks like. Now, I'm kind of thinking it may be a good idea to drill through this tab and put a bolt through it. I don't like it necessarily, but I think it might be a good idea. We might not do it. I'm just thinking out loud here, guys. The next thing I've got to do is grind all this finish or paint or whatever this is off this cast steel. And there's also these radiuses cast into the part. I think we're going to take a grinder and cut down on those radiuses so that this can fit more square down around this part. And then I might have to also alter the shape of this some to match. Bottom line is we need this to get down in there and fit as best as possible. And that is a lot of extra space next to these. I don't know if I'm going to try to fill that with the welder. I don't know yet, but that's where we're at. We're working on this right now. That's where we're at. So give us some time. We're going to grind all this stuff up, clean it up, start looking at it, shaping it better, and we'll be back in a minute.
The next thing to do is take down these ridges next to the bumps on the axle. So I'm going to use the cut-off wheel and the grinder and get right into it.
Between Steffen and I, we got these two nubs, these two studs on the axle. We got the contours, the radiuses that were at the base of them ground out so that these would fit more square in there. And the next thing I think I'm gonna do, because I'm just feeling this out, is I'm gonna tack weld these brackets at a 90-degree angle to the axle. And then drill through, once it's tacked, drill through for a through bolt here. And after that, I think we'll try to weld around it a little bit or even crush it in. So I took the heim joint out with the spacers, and it just so happens that 2 half-inch nuts are the same width as this heim joint with a spacer on each side. I took this out of the equation. Because I don't want to melt the nylon that's in there. So having this, I can get it really hot and not worry about anything melting. Now that we're tack welded, I'm going to send a 1/2-inch drill bit through this. now that we have the bolt through this, my plan immediately is to heat this up to where this metal is pretty hot, like flexible. And then I'm gonna crank this nut down, this bolt down, and hopefully between the bolt and then maybe some hammering, some twisting with a pair with pliers and whatnot, we can get this to kind of offset down so it's crushed up against this nub. And then we'll be able to twist this part of it on the upper half so it's straight, so it's facing straight once this is all crushed down. Let's see what happens. All right, we got it pretty hot. Let's see what happens. All right, let me get a C-clamp and we're gonna crush it there too. So I got this thing where I think I want it. It definitely tapered in and crushed in. And I got it preheated. I can feel the heat through my glove coming off of this thing. It's pretty hot. I'm sure it's around 450 or more. I'm gonna go ahead and run a couple of beads on this thing and see how it takes. I got the first side. I welded it as much as I think it needed to be welded. I welded it in between at the top of where this stub was, and I kind of filled in this area with weld and blended it. I was heavy on the base metal, on the axle, the cast steel, and I kind of just pushed the puddle over and saw it fuse with the mild steel. So I kind of filled that area in. I went ahead, I filled around in the bottom and made sure it was blended, and I made sure to melt the base metal. And then up down the sides, I got nice little puddles going down the sides, but I did not weld on the inside of this because I didn't want to threaten the structure of the mild steel by welding on the inside and making a brittle spot. So I figured this should be good. I'm gonna leave that bolt in there. It's tight with a lock washer. I'm probably just gonna cut off the threads so they're not sticking out, but that bolt's staying. And I think that's gonna be strong enough. If not, we'll find out. But I'm gonna go and do the same exact thing to this side. And once that's done, we'll put it back on the tractor and start fitting it for the tie rods and where they need to go through the frame. All right, so that's it. We got these fully welded. This one came out nicer than that one because I learned a few lessons on this one that I didn't do on that one, which is this one was significantly more preheated on this side. But if you can see on this side here, I went back and forth with the welder and just completely made sure that it fused in with that cast steel. and it just went around, and then I came back and I did a second pass on this one to try to make it similar. But this thing is still red hot. And what we're gonna do now is we're gonna stick it in the oven at 350. I think that's a good temperature, maybe 375. And we're gonna leave it in there for about 45 minutes and then turn the oven off and just let it sit in there and cool down until it's room temperature. And I think that's gonna prevent any cracking, or I don't know. I'm not the best metallurgist when it comes to this stuff, but I am a YouTube professional. So with that said, we're gonna go ahead and get it in the oven. We'll see you in a minute. All right, in the oven she goes. Man, this thing's hot right through the welding gloves. What's up, guys? It's the next day. Last night we left off, we had this in the oven. I ended up putting it up to like 450 and then 500 degrees. Let it get up to temperature, and I shut it off. We actually had to take the kids to town last night. We did a bunch of stuff in town. We were gone for the rest of the night. We got back about 3 or 4 hours later, and I reached in the oven, and this thing was still like comfortably hot to the touch. I could hold my hand on it, but it was still pretty hot. So it cooled down gradually over a lot of hours. And if you check it out, it's pretty stout. It's my first time ever welding steel to cast steel, but I think we got it to fuse, and I think we got it to bond. And we also have that 1/2-inch bolt right through it, just for extra. And what I did was I cut off yesterday, not on camera, but we cut off the threads, and I just buzzed it with the welder to make sure that could never back off. But this axle should be good to go. What we're gonna do is take off these spacers that we made for the heim joints to fit in, and that's gonna be it for the axle. This thing's ready for paint. We gotta get it mocked up first. And the other thing I'm gonna do is on these steering arms, I bolted a bolt through them last time when we built them because there was already a hole through the steel. So we filled it with a bolt, extra strength, whatever. And then I welded the same way so the bolt could never come loose. Well, these are gonna now be our bump stops, our steering stops. These bolts happen to be in a really good spot. So what I'm gonna do is I just got done cutting this one off with the bandsaw. I cut off that spot weld. We're gonna unscrew that bolt out of there, and we're gonna put a longer bolt in it. A 2-inch bolt probably, grade 8 if we got it, whatever, it doesn't matter. But we're gonna bolt a bolt with 2 nuts, and it's gonna be sticking up so that when the steering arm turns all the way, that bolt will come into contact with the axle and stop it from being able to steer too far. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll do something else, but right now that's the plan. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll get into it, and we're gonna get this axle mocked up on the tractor. So we got the axle back in, and we're trying to mock this up. As you can see, I've got a tie rod here. And first and foremost, we're trying to figure out the angle it wants to be at. So we definitely want it closer to the tractor than further away. I'm kind of biased to having it almost straight. But regardless of where we have it in this way, one thing that's going to All right, well, we were moving right along. We thought we were on the winning path, but apparently we just didn't understand what we were actually doing here, because huge red flag is that the clutch and the brake is hitting right into it. So we're gonna go ahead and have to make these tie rods shorter and use some of the holes up in here under the engine. All right, so we need to shorten up these tie rods about 4 1/4 inches. I've already got them marked out. I took them out of the heim joints. I found the center of them, and then I measured over each way 2 1/8. So we're gonna cut out 4 1/4 inches from the center of these tie rods, and we're gonna do the same thing we did with the tie rods for the steering. We're gonna drill out some rod couplings. We're gonna put them on there, weld them, plug weld them, call it good. All right guys, so like I said before, we cut these rods down. We cut 4 1/4 inches out of the center. This is what we did. We cut that out of the center of it. Cleaned all the paint off. I drilled out a rod coupling and I drilled it for plug welds. So that way it's gonna fit like this. We'll be able to plug weld right in the center where they meet. Plug weld here, here. It's like that on all the sides. And then we'll throw a little bit of weld around the ends. And that should be strong enough. And these things are significantly shorter now, so they're really gonna be stout. I got this one set up. I'm gonna go ahead and send it. All right guys, it's the next day. We worked on this a little bit late last night, and I'm gonna go over a few things. So first and foremost, we came up with a way to mount the tie rods to the frame. Now this is 1/2 inch threaded rod, and it goes completely through this bracket. Now let me show you what that bracket is. At work we use this stuff called unistrut. Now unistrut is for supporting conduits, whatever, stuff like that. Well, unistrut has a whole line of fittings that come with it. This is one of them. This would bolt to the unistrut, and then you could come off here with rod, or there's multiple holes in it, but this stuff's pretty stout. It's about 1/8 inch at least, maybe 3/16 thick. And so what we did was we took one of these and we mounted it to the frame using 2 3/8 bolts on each side. This 1/2 inch bolt goes clean through this support bracket. It has a nut on the back side of the frame rail. It's also on the front. Can you see down in here? There's a nut pinching the rod to the frame rail, and there's also a nut on the back side of this fitting. It would be here, and on the front, and obviously a nut pinching the tie rod to the whole thing. Now we're going to cut off the excess thread, but that's what we came up with to make it nice and stout. It's not permanent. We can just unbolt this. What we've got now is that's our rear mount. We went over the front mounts, and now we've got articulation. What we're doing here is, because these are fixed tie rods, and I kind of had a feeling this was going to be the case, when this axle articulates, the length of this tie rod is going to change. So when it's at its straightest point, it's its longest. When it goes up or down, it gets shorter in space. And what's happening is the axle is now moving, I don't know, roughly, if I had to guess by eyeballing it, 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. It slides back and forth on the axle pivot pin. So that's fine. We're gonna run it like that for now. We're gonna put the other tie rod on the other side. We're gonna clean that whole assembly up before we put it all back together when it's complete. And I got a bunch of this dry lubrication stuff. It does not attract dirt. We'll pack the axle full of that stuff. We'll keep the whole thing lubricated so it can slide back and forth for now. So last night I went to bed and I'm not 100% happy with the way that is. Long term, I think we're gonna do something different. But I sat there and thought about it last night, and what I came up with is, instead of having fixed tie rods here, I'm gonna try and see if I can get a couple of high pressure gas, nitrogen gas struts. We'll fix the axle back how it used to be. We'll push the axle all the way up forward so that it's actually making contact with this front plate. And I did also comment, and I re-watched Hot Lap Garage's video on when he did this. And he actually commented back this morning and said the reason he did this whole thing was because he had hit a tree. And there was so much force involved when that axle hit on one side and it was unsupported that it sheared or broke the bolts that hold on this whole front plate that's on the front that supports the hood and everything else. So those bolts sheared, and that's what caused him to do this mod. Well, what we're gonna do is we're gonna drill out those bolts just for precautionary measures, and we're gonna change them out to 1/2 inch. We'll make them fatter, bigger, stronger. So the plan is in the future, going back to my future plan for this, and we're gonna try this, is first of all, make that stronger. Second of all, have the axle all the way up till it's basically rubbing on it. So that'll give it some more support, rocking side to side. We'll put the spacers back behind it, how it was before we started doing this and working on this. And I think we're gonna put those gas struts. Now I was looking online. They sell them on Amazon at varying lengths. But I found a set on McMaster Car last night, and they have a 400-pound compression strength, and the extension strength on them is like 250 some odd pounds. Now if you had that on both sides and the axle was fixed and they weren't all the way compressed or extended, just kind of in the middle, right? And the axle was supported by this front plate and by those gas struts. If it had hit something on one side, for instantaneous, you're gonna have about 400 pounds holding it forward. And on the other side, it's gonna wanna extend. You'll have another 250 pounds. So you're looking at 650 pounds of holding force instantaneously, because those gas struts are slow. They don't just compress like shock absorbers. They're really slow, and they have a lot of resistance. And that'll also let it, instead of it moving back and forth, it'll be fixed. And then when it articulates, those gas pistons will be forced to extend and compress. It'll slow down the articulation. You won't be able to just flop it back and forth. It'll slow it down, almost like a torsional shock absorber. Now it sounds great to me. I'm definitely gonna try it. And that's gonna be the plan. But for now, we're gonna go with this because it's what we got. And we're gonna get back to it and see you in a minute. All right, so we're starting on the other side real quick. All right, so we're getting to work on the other side. We're gonna duplicate it, obviously. Well, here's that piece I showed you in the last clip. It's gonna go right here. And so there's 3 holes existing in the frame here. And don't worry about that hole, that's the one we drilled wrong. But there's 3 holes existing in the frame. This is gonna be 1/2 inch. We need to enlarge it to 1/2 inch to pass through this bracket. Now, if you notice, this hole here was already there, but it gets kind of halfway into this hole that we need to make. So what I'm gonna do when I did it on the other side is I cleaned out the hole with a drill bit, so it's got good steel. We cleaned off the front of a 3/8 bolt. Steffen's gonna hold the bolt from the backside just like that. So it's just below the surface. And I'm gonna go ahead and plug weld that bolt in there. Once it's plug welded, we'll grind this side smooth, and Steffen's gonna take a Sawzall and cut the bolt off the other side flush, so that way that hole's filled in. Then we can go ahead and drill through once this bracket's mounted. We'll put the 1/2 inch rod through it. We'll drill this hole once the 1/2 inch rod is located this thing. We'll drill this hole, and then last we'll send a 3/8 bit through that hole. And it's not going to like kind of half moon eclipse over that hole there because we'll have it filled in with steel. All right, we got it all set up. Steffen's holding it in there with a pair of pliers. You can see it's filling in that hole. And I'm just gonna stick my welder right there. And I'm gonna plug weld and fill that hole in with weld. Now we don't have a big gaping hole in the frame, and it's not going to be so sloppy. So that's all the welding we have to do this. That's all, we just did that to close that up like I said, so check that out. Now we've got that hole closed up. We're going to enlarge this hole to 1/2 inch, and then there's going to be another hole here. We may or may not plug this back up with a bolt and clean it, or just put a bolt in there and just clamp it down tight, cuff the threads. I don't know. We might probably just plug weld that one back shut since we drilled it for no reason. Anyway, let's go ahead and enlarge this one. So here's the setup, like on the other side. This piece of half-inch threaded rod is pinched on the frame. I've got a nut on one side, on the back side. This side's got the lock washer. This bracket just fits over like so. And I run that back nut just up to the back of it. This side's gonna get a lock washer. And this is gonna clamp it into place. Now that's going to be super strong as it is. But once we add those 2 3/8 bolts, this whole thing is just stout, and it's going to hold that tie rod from here to here. And it's actually off the frame. It's 2.5 inches to the center of the tie rod, so it's essentially coming straight off the axle to this bracket, and it's basically centered, so it's parallel to the frame. What I'm trying to say. So Steffan's gonna cut off that bolt on the backside that we just welded. We're gonna drill those holes and we'll be back in a minute. All right, this bolt is in, that hole's drilled. This thing's already stout. Now we're gonna drill right next to the hole that we welded shut earlier. All right, guys, tie rod, our bracket's done. So we got this thing all put back together, and I was playing around with this off camera, and it's only going to get about 1.5 inches of articulation each way. And that's because of the tie rods are just not letting it. That's it. That's as far as they'll extend. And I've messed with them, the lengths on both, and just felt it. That's the sweet spot right there. That's going to get about 1.5 inches of articulation. I put the bolts in the steering arms to make the steering so it can't go too far. So those are in there, and they do hit the axle when you turn it. Let's see. See? Right here. It stops. Those hit and stop it from going too far on both sides. And like I said, we're gonna run this for now just to get them rolling. That's how it's gonna be, guys. I do want to get the gas shocks and try that theory to see if the gas shocks in place of these tie rods will be a better deal, which I really think they will be, because I think that once the axle has a big spacer behind it and it's fixed in place and it can't slide on the pivot pin, and it's up against this plate here, literally just right behind it, maybe a 32nd of an inch or less clearance, I think that with the gas shocks, it'll have enough holding power to prevent it from tweaking and getting wore out. But that's what we're gonna go with. And we're gonna go ahead and build a couple of bump stops, probably an L bracket. A piece of L channel we'll cut to fit here. We'll bolt through that hole existing. We'll cut a piece of tire tread and mount it to the bottom of the L bracket. And we'll limit this thing to as far as it can go. So that way it doesn't bend these tie rods, because that's what it'll do. If you really force it, it'll bend these tie rods that we just got done putting in. Now, none of this stuff's permanent. It's all bolted to the frame. These brackets are permanent that I welded onto the back of the axle, but it's a good thing we have 3 more axles out there. And we're not stuck with anything. We don't even have to use a John Deere axle. He might decide in the future we want to go with a square tube and golf cart knuckles. Who knows, right? And rack and pinion, sky's the limit. But right now, we did this, we're trying this, it's gonna get it moving. This axle is a heck of a lot stronger and beefier than the stock wheel horse one ever dreamed of being. So this is gonna get him going, get him down the road. Next thing we're gonna do is build those bump stops really quick, jump on the tires, and we're gonna take some pictures of this thing done. He's gonna take it for a ride. All right, this thing's all reassembled. We've got this thing, everything's cinched up pretty tight. The bolts are tight. We cut off the excess rod. We did make some bump stops for the front so that these couldn't articulate too much and bend anything, but the bump stops are being painted currently. We'll put those on there before we drive it. Anyway, we're gonna move on from this and we're gonna start mounting the tires on those rims because it's been like now 2 days since we painted those rims. They should be good and dry. Let's get right to it. All right, we just put the valve stems in the rims. We got it mounted up in the tire changer. I just pushed on the first bead and we literally just had to rewatch the video that was made for us, Hot Lap Garage, to make sure we were gonna do it right again. So, what a treat, man. First time doing this, ever. So we got to get it. All right, the tire went on. It worked about halfway around this tire with that tire tool, the way we watched in your video. But I don't know if it's a combination of these rims or have that enamel paint on them, and we didn't use grease either. But it got to a point where it just didn't want to move, and you could hear the nylon and the crap stretching in here. So we took that tool, the tool kind of just like twisted and fell out. But we put a bunch of clamps on here and just worked it the rest of the way on. Still using that with the pointy end, we just kind of flipped it over the edge. But anyways, we're gonna go ahead and put some bead sealer on because this stuff works pretty good for me. We're gonna flip it over and we're gonna put some straps around it and try to get it inflated. So the swamp witches are done. We actually have them mounted on the tractor right now. And we're gonna go with the Sunfs next. Now, we left the bearings in these rims because they're really hard to get out, and the ones you get from eBay don't fit. I learned that from my tractor. But we can't use the tire changer. The bearings won't fit over the hub. So we got this piece of 1-inch threaded rod I brought home from a job site. It's clamped in the vise, and we're gonna have to do this with screwdrivers and tire spoons. Plus this is an 8-inch rim. All right, let me get All right, that went right on nice and easy. Now, we are gonna fluid fill these tires, these inner tubes, but for today's sake, we're gonna just put them in and fill them with air and put them on the tractor so we can see what it looks like. We wanna take it for a test ride. What happened? What was that? Let's take it off of here. Oh, there it goes. All right, that one's seated.
I lost my air.
Yes, 35. Ooh. All right, this is the last tire. I'm not even gonna try to front. This is a pain in the butt. With or without a tire changer, I personally fight this stuff. Like I said, I fight it. Tires are back on this thing. Obviously, we got it down off the jack stands. First impressions, I think it looks fantastic. It looks stout. It looks mean. The back tires looking good. We've only got, I think, what, 5 or 7 PSI in the back and 5 in the front. No big deal. Like I said, the front tires will be fluid filled. Not tonight. And we're also going to take all this stuff back apart and paint it. That needs to be tightened up a little bit, but that's all good. Next thing we're going to do, the bump stops. We put in the bump stops here, or Steffen did. So next thing we're going to do is take this thing outside in the barnyard and drive it around in the mud a little bit and see what it feels like. Alright guys, that's going to be a wrap for this video. It's been about 3 days in the making. We've been juggling this with the Pinewood Derby and everything else, but this thing's finally got tires on it. It's finally got some cool axle mods. Next video, or next thing we do to this thing is either going to be a pulley swap, definitely a translock, or both. I don't know if we can work that into the same video, but That's important. Translock probably over pulley swap and then pulley swap, or both, I don't know. Let me know in the comments what's more important. But this thing's come a long way in the last couple days. It was a lot of work and we like doing it. If you're new to the channel, or if you found any of this stuff informative or entertaining, maybe both, please give me a like, a comment in the section below. Definitely give me a subscribe. And once again, this is Steffen. I'm Jason. This is Tennessee Mountain Homestead, and we'll see you on the next one.